homelessness. The next group is going to talk about leaving homelessness, barriers in the transition process. Thank you.
Good morning, beautiful people. Good morning. 2 years ago, we sat in those chairs like many of you, listening to these presentations, both inspired by them and also intimidated, having to hear some of the terms like methodology, quantitative, qualitative. And thanks to Springfield College and a lot of hugs and encouragement from Ms. Benita, Dr. Castillo, Ms. Bobby, our professors, here we are today, 2 years later, having lived inside of those terms and completed and conducted our own IRB-approved action research project. So we want to thank all of you that have shared and contributed with us along this journey. We are Project Team Hope, Homeless Outreach Project for Education. The purpose of our study was to take a look at substance abuse and homelessness here in Houston, and more specifically, the barriers that this population faces during the transitioning process when leaving the streets and finding permanent housing. Now, why is this topic important to us? Well, simply because it can happen to anybody. It happens to the once wealthy, the educated, you name it. I'll bet just about everybody in here knows somebody that's been affected by addiction, alcoholism, possibly even homelessness. And if you attend school here, undoubtedly you've shared a classroom with somebody that has. And this is why this is something that is important to us. Again, we're Project Team Hope. I'm Chris Jurkowski. These are my fellow colleagues and researchers, Sandy Kluchin and Manny. Now, as we go through our presentation today, we'll be taking you through a step-by-step process of how to conduct your own action research project from start to finish. Now, you're going to see some similarities between our study and the study that just came up, and I want to clear up a few things. Some of those percentages are going to be close to the same percentages that you saw, and some are going to be different. Obviously, we had different studies that were, you guys were in the third ward, correct? And ours were Houston population overall. Additionally, certain agencies define certain terms differently, and that has an impact on those percentages as well as the research. So we decided to use the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services definitions for most of our study. And they define homelessness as a homeless person is an individual without permanent housing who may reside on the streets, in a shelter, a mission, single room occupancy, things like squatting. We also use their definition for substance abuse, which is the unreasonable ingestion of mood-altering chemicals, substance and chemicals that cause harm or injury to the abuser. And lastly, they use actually the APA's definition for substance use disorders, which can also be found in the DSM-5, which reads, substance use disorders occur when the recurrent use of alcohol and or drugs causes clinically and functionally significant impairment, such as health problems, disability, and failure to meet major responsibilities at school, work, and home.
Okay, a research project starts off with identifying the problem and the significance of that problem. When we came together as a group, we were unanimously interested in substance abuse. After further discussing our backgrounds and our career paths, we knew immediately that chemical dependency and homelessness was going to be at the center of our research. Next, we performed a community assessment. And the initial research from that literature, we found out that in 2015, there were over 4,600 homeless population in Houston. Surprisingly, over 2,000 additional homeless are presently incarcerated. And from those two total, there's 73% of those homeless have some kind of unaddressed mental and medical health issues. Now, most of us are familiar with the connection between substance abuse and mental illness to homelessness. Okay? Our problem statement is over half of the homeless have a mental illness or substance use disorder. And here are the percentages to justify that, both for substance use disorder and mental illness. But an interesting fact that came to light was homeless veterans, when compared to non-homeless persons, are only slightly more likely to have PTSD or traumatic brain injury. And that leans towards the idea of telling us that not only are the streets rough, but they can be violent and very traumatic. One of the most essential elements to conducting your research and the design of that research is the research question. Team Hope's research question is, are there barriers that exist which prevent unsheltered homeless persons with a substance use disorder from obtaining housing in Houston? And if so, what are they?
Now, after you've completed designing your main research question, it's then time to develop your key research questions. These help to further guide and narrow the focus of your study. Now, our first question is, are there substance abuse issues that influence or prolong periods of homelessness? Second, which psychosocial stressors contribute to longer periods for homeless individuals with a substance use disorder? Third, what criteria do some services require that a typical homeless person cannot meet? And finally, fourth, why do some individuals choose to remain homeless when housing options are available? Now, with your research questions in mind, it's then time to delve into the literature, what's already been reported about this issue. Now, as we were looking at the literature, we came across what often triggers homelessness in Houston. As you can see, a big chunk of it right up here says loss of job was their trigger. About 35% claim that. But I want to highlight a few other statistics. For instance, let's take a look at drug and alcohol. About a tenth of the population claims that drugs and alcohol was the trigger for them becoming homeless. Again, about a tenth says being sick, disabled, or having some sort of mental issue. And again, about a tenth says incarceration was the cause of their homelessness. Now, interestingly enough, as we delved further into the study, we discovered that many of these triggers worsen the longer someone is homeless or the more often that they are homeless. So let's take a look at that for a sec. On an earlier slide, Manny showed you some statistics. He showed you that 63% of the current population of homeless individuals in Houston have some sort of substance use disorder, while 80% have some sort of mental health issue. Yet if you look here, for both of those, only about a tenth of the population claim that to be their trigger. And again, with incarceration, Manny also referred to the fact that about a third of the current population of homeless individuals in Houston are currently incarcerated. Yet, once again, only a tenth claim that to be their trigger. Now here you see some of the common barriers to service utilization. While the literature had a wealth of information in this regards, everything you see up here is limited to the perspective of the human services professional, rather than the perspective of the homeless individuals with the lived experience. Now, I don't know about you guys sitting here today, but as we delved further into our study, this was an issue we had hoped to address.
Here we see some unfortunate facts that the literature revealed. And it's widely known that the homeless populations typically face greater health consequences than other populations. And let's take a look at a few. First one here. Homeless individuals are 11 times more likely to be convicted in a court of law when compared to you or I. And here we see some correlation to some of the literature review numbers we spoke of earlier as far as incarceration. The next two. Homeless individuals are 40 times more likely to be a victim of violence and 22 times more likely to be a victim of sexual assault. Now, there's a strong connection between post-traumatic stress disorder in both violent and sexual assault situations. And we also know that traumatic brain injury almost always occur from some sort of violent event. And again, we see some correlation to some of those literature numbers that we saw earlier in regards to PTSD and traumatic brain injury. But probably the most disturbing statistic that we came across during our research was the bottom two, life expectancy. Now, for all of us in this room today, both male and female, collectively we have a life expectancy of around 79 years of age. However, if we were to become homeless, that number drops to 50 years of age. So there's nearly a 30-year loss of life just from becoming homeless. Now this brings us to our golf ball story. A professor walks into class one day carrying a large tub of items, and he takes out an empty mason jar and he fills it with golf balls. And he shows it to the class, and he asks the class, is the jar full? They agree that it is, and next he grabs a bag of pebbles and fills up that mason jar in between the golf balls, and then asks the class again, is the jar full? They agree that it is. Next he gets a bag of sand, filling in the remaining gaps in between the golf balls and the pebbles, and asks the class one last time, is the jar full? Unanimously they agree that it is, but he's got one more trick up his sleeve. Reaches behind his desk, and the class begins to laugh, and he pours water into the jar and asks the class, finally says, I want you to think of the mason jar as a microcosm of your life. The golf balls are the big things, the important things in your life. These are your friends, your family, your favorite passions, things of that nature. And the pebbles, well, then these also, the golf balls, they're things that can't be taken away from you, not even in death. They're synonymous with who you are and what you've become and what you represent. Now the pebbles are still important things, but these are things like your car, your home, your job. They're important, but they can be replaced. Now the sand is all the small stuff that doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on the quality of our lives nor our happiness. Now the water is everything that's going on around you in your life. And as we know, life can be turbulent at times, but as long as things are going well in our life, it has little impact on us. The mason jar keeps things together. Now we're going to come back to the golf ball story in a little bit.
Okay, next. After getting a solid foundation of the facts and a thorough review of the literature, it is then time to find partners out in the community to do your research with, and to further align yourself with those that are most informed about the issue, that which you will be researching and its prevalence in the community. We worked and consulted with someone from each one of these local agencies here in Houston. And from the onset, God opened the door for us and sent us our main contributor, Open Door Mission. Open Door Mission is an independent, spiritually based, nonprofit organization that is also an evidence-based recovery and rehabilitation facility. Its program director, Mr. Daniel Garza, was very cordial and instrumental in allowing us to conduct our research on various occasions throughout our study. And in order to get through these doors, there's a qualification for residency. Once again, haven't been homeless for at least 6 months with some kind of substance use history. Now, the mission's objective is to provide as many programs as possible to those clients that are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and to provide them with as many tools as possible so that they can maintain lifelong sobriety. Open Door Mission is a 198-bed facility that offers programs such as GED, some college classwork, and other various programs. It also has on-site medical care and detox, and the facility is fortunate enough to have a small fleet of vehicles to be able to transport these participants off campus, either to appointments or in interviews whenever they need to. Now, across the courtyard, they have the chapel. Here's where they go through their 12-step spiritual programs and offer church services to those wishing to attend. And lastly, of course, is Mayfield House. Mayfield House is across the street from the campus, and it is 2 houses that are adjacent to each other, and that's a transitional shelter for these participants that have already finished their treatment program and have graduated. They can stay here from 6 months on up till they get their feet back into the community. Now that you have community partners and someone to consult with, it is then time to start designing how you will create your research. This is called the methodology section. This information that you're going to see here is the information that you will be providing to the Institutional Review Board, also known as the IRB. Okay? Now, we chose a qualitative approach for our research, and our participation selection criteria was adults currently experiencing homelessness at least once in the past 6 months and had a substance use disorder. Our research instruments included survey questionnaires, individual interviews. We did focus group and assigned pseudonyms to them to further protect their identities. We offered them open-ended questions in a private setting to further get our qualitative data.
Now, after having completed your research design, it's then time to actually go out into the field and collect your data. So that's exactly what we did. Now, we chose to digitally record all our interviews. Then we had to transcribe them word for word. It was quite the tedious process, but trust me, it was well worth it. From there, we compared the data that we collected from our participants, and we analyzed it, and we looked to see what it was saying. What was it trying to tell us? And then we compared it to the literature. What were the parallels and discrepancies? And how is that relevant to the scope of our study? And then we even took it a step further. We took a look at consistent themes and significant statements. Both of these help to give you a deeper understanding of the phenomenon in which you're studying, which for us happened to be homelessness and addiction. Now, consistent themes are those things that kept emerging time and time again during our interview process. So, as you can see, most of our participants stated they were treated well by services, treated with respect by law enforcement, that substance abuse played a major role in periods of homelessness. They also said that most services had too many requirements, long waiting lists, no margin for error in areas such as paperwork, and that many services gave them the runaround or had them jumping through hoops. Next, we have significant statements. Significant statements are those items that really stand out to you, kind of tug at your heartstrings and make you feel some type of way. Now, Yori here said, it made me question them. They even realized what being homeless meant. He had nowhere to cook, or even utensils to cook with. Now, Yori was referring to the simple fact that he went to a food bank where they knew he was homeless. Yet they gave him items such as raw meats and other goods that required a kitchen to cook in. Yet he had no kitchen. Next we have Paisley. Paisley said, "I've lost all hope. I got a hold of an old friend to borrow enough money so that I could buy a tent to live out in the woods. I've given up any hope of getting somewhere to live or to get off drugs." And finally, we have Farley. Farley says, "It's tough because you know your situation is because of your drug use. You don't want to use, but it's so miserable out there with no hope. And at least the drugs help you feel better, at least for a little while." Now, Farley, he was a pleasure to interview. He was a real funny guy. In fact, we joked that one of the reasons he chose Farley as his pseudonym is that he was a big fan of Chris Farley, who sadly died of the disease of addiction. Now, we've been keeping in close contact with the clinical staff at Open Door Mission. Farley was one of their most recent graduates, and they tell us that he's really doing quite well out there on his own.
Okay, next in this section, I will be discussing various results from our study. As Sandy pointed out a little while ago to the percentages of what triggers homelessness, most of our data was very consistent with that literature. Hell, it says so right there. One of the most interesting things that came to light was that our participants had substance use and substance use disorder. While 19% of our participants reported that drug use was the reason they became homeless, we had participants that reported that they hardly ever drank any alcohol and didn't do any drugs prior to becoming homeless. Yet, 100% of them had some kind of substance use disorder after becoming homeless. Next is, here's what the participants had to say about the barriers to receiving services and what interrupted those services. Having no ID cards, no beds available, having to abstain from drugs and alcohol. Poor communication and trust issues were a problem. And once again, most of these were consistent with our literature. Participants reported issues that were not addressed in the literature, such as poor accessibility and transportation issues, transitional requirements. On that, there were too many and too strict. A lot of them were unaware of the services that existed. And mostly all agreed to the idea that there was a lack of integrative care and coordinated services. By this meaning that as a homeless person, I had to go to this program and give them all my information, go get sent to this other program and giving them all my information, and then having to go so on and so on. And they felt that if there was some kind of correlation and communication within these agencies, you know, the services could be more streamlined and expedited so as to get services. And lastly, treatment from agencies, professionals, and law enforcement. While most of our participants reported that some of the services were evasive, and they did kind of get the runaround, most of them reported that they were treated with dignity and respect. I was proud and interested to learn that the city officials in Houston treat the homeless with respect. Whenever they had an encounter or run-in with law enforcement or police, they all said that they were treated with respect. When our participants were asked how services can be improved, most of our participants said right off the bat, correct info and information and updated information from the green sheets. The green sheets offers local services within the greater Houston area. One-on-one life coaching, transitioning programs addressing reentry, either from rehabilitation centers or from jail. Ways to reach their caseworkers and second chance wellness programs. And bus passes to be able to get to their appointments or in interviews or whatever. But the most interesting thing is they mostly all agreed to the idea that they wish that there was more places like Open Door Mission.
Now, why did most of us get into the human services field to begin with? Why did most of us come to this school? To make a difference, right? To be the change we wish to see in the world. Well, this project gave us the perfect opportunity to do just that. So that's exactly what we did. And we started by examining the results and then reporting those results. Then we identified opportunities based off those results. And we compiled a list of recommendations. And from that list of recommendations, we built our project implementation plan. Now, our implementation plan is called P.A.T.H, Peers Assisting in the Transitioning from Homelessness. Now, we developed the program P.A.T.H based off the interview responses given to us by our participants, as well as the information provided to us by professional stakeholders during a focus group. Now, P.A.T.H is centered around the concept of mentorship. Open Door Mission alumni would come back to mentor individuals in the third and final phase of the Open Door Mission program. And they would help mentor them in areas such as life skills, like setting up a bank account or opening up an account with some sort of utility company for water and electricity. Many of these are issues that none of them faced before and didn't know how to overcome. Additionally, they'd help them locate resources within the community, such as second chance programs for felons, workforce solution, job readiness training, and anything else that would benefit their circumstances. So, all of these skills, everything I've just mentioned and resources, are necessary for these individuals to remain sober and off the streets. Now, we also wanted to address two of the main issues our professional stakeholders addressed with us, such as the ability to stay in contact with their graduates, tracking their needs, successes, and location, as well as continued aftercare, which many of them weren't getting, and they saw a huge recidivism rate just for that reason. So, P.A.T.H builds on that component automatically. These individuals are coming back and being leaders in the community and receiving that continued aftercare. Additionally, this is helping to reduce reentry to homelessness rates, as well as recidivism rates. And I'm proud to announce that Open Door Mission has adopted the P.A.T.H program and made it their own.
Now, when we left the golf ball story, the professor was telling us that the mason jar helps hold things together. And of course, we all know that that isn't always the case. So the professor takes out a colander and empties the contents of his mason jar into the colander. And he says to everyone, there's times when life weakens us and circumstances weaken our lives. And that's what the holes in the colander represent. And then he pours some water over the contents and the sand naturally washes through. And he says, when things around us are turbulent, sometimes we have to set some things aside, or perhaps sometimes even lose some things. Next, he pulls out a metal grate, and he says to the class, without question, there's times when life throws us curveballs, and we all have some pretty big adversities that we have to face. Loss of a loved one, divorce, addiction, poverty, war, possibly even homelessness. So he pours the contents, the pebbles and the golf balls onto the grate. And most of the pebbles fall through. Some of the golf balls remain. And next he takes that empty mason jar and wiping just the sand and the pebbles, he wipes them back into the mason jar. And he says to the class, in life, if we spend all of our time and energy on the small things, we don't leave any room for the big things, the important things, the golf balls. Pay attention to these things. These are the things that are critical to your happiness. Take time out, spend time with your children, do activities with them. See your parents, visit your grandparents, treasure your education. Take care of these things. These are your priorities. You know, take care of your golf balls because everything else is just sand. Now, for our homeless community, there is no mason jar. There is no sand, and the pebbles that they might have include maybe some worn photographs or a tent for living out in the woods. And imagine, you know, I mean, take a look around today. Look at how grateful and how lucky all of us are to have, I mean, number one, each other. To have Springfield, to have their support systems, and imagine for a moment not having any of those things. So everyone needs someone, so be their golf ball.
We're standing side by side. What it takes to come alive. Way I'm feeling, I just can't deny. Got to let it go. Found love in a hopeless place. Tell me if I die. Tell me if I die. Found love in a hopeless place. My fancy way. Shine a light through an open door. Love like I will divide. Turn away 'cause I need you more. Feel the heartbeat in my mind. The way I'm feeling, I just can't deny. But I got to let it go. We found love in a holy place. We found love in a holy We found love in a holy
Now, how can we take the information that the PATH implementation plan did not address and come up with a solution? Well, introducing IOSC. Individual Outreach Services Connector. We designed and created IOSC to address the issues revealed to us by our research of the literature, by our interviews with our participants, as well as our focus group with professional stakeholders.
Now, the IOSC is a kiosk. It's strategically placed around the city. The IOSC is accessible to absolutely anyone. After the initial pilot phase, there's plans to interface both a smartphone application as well as internet access.
Now, the IOSC also helps to address those common issues that many people face in time of need when they're trying to reach out, only to stumble onto roadblocks. From this IOSC, you will be greeted on the touchscreen by the Start menu. Here you can either log in or create an account and proceed on to the services that you seek.
Now, one of the things we wanted to do when coming up with the IOSC is we wanted to address some of the paperwork issues that the gentleman spoke about earlier, as well as care coordinated services and trying to streamline some things. And so with the IOSC, when you create your account, you enter only the information you feel comfortable sharing. And you, at any time, can choose to share that with whatever agencies you choose to share it with. This will also help clear up some of those accessibility issues that we have, as well as hours of operation. And in English or in Spanish, you set up your account. There's even a voice recognition software for those that are illiterate or visually impaired. And again, you can connect with these people via email, or if that particular agency has the ability, it could possibly even send a text message to somebody out there. And literally at your fingertips is now a wealth of information that was previously not available to you. And there's also pre-programmed prompts that will help guide you to services that you may not know exist. One of those might be, say, blankets during the winter time. And there might be a pre-programmed prompt that comes up, do you need a blanket? Would you like to talk to one of those agencies?
Once again, this system will help to address many of the issues that our participants brought up, such as getting to the caseworkers, correct and updated information on the green sheets and other services that are provided in the greater Houston area. And if they wish to make or cancel appointments, they have a way to leave a message.
Now, from the IOS, you can also print a bus pass. On that bus pass would include a Google Earth image of the agency in which you're going, along with some contact information to a contact person there. A common problem that we see in the homeless community is shoes getting stolen. People wake up, don't have your shoes, and it happens quite a bit more often than you would think. They can simply go to an IOSC, search for clothing banks that are, number one, open, that are near them, and potentially even send a message asking if someone's got something relatively near their size. Another common problem in the homeless community that we've heard a few times today is no beds. You know, a lot of times people show up at a shelter only to find out the last bed was just given out 5 minutes ago. Instead, they can go to an IOSC and find out which ones have beds and what's their availability, what are some of the rules, and clear up some of those things. Again, the IOSC isn't just limited to the homeless population. This is for anybody that's in a time of need. As we know, some people are fearful of reporting certain things, and they might not necessarily get the opportunity to have some of the services available by not possibly going through law enforcement. We know that there's a lot of rape victims and domestic violence individuals that are fearful of their person that victimized them and don't report it. The IOS gives them a place to turn. Or perhaps maybe somebody's concerned with privacy issues and they don't want to use their own computer or their family's computer out of fear of somebody finding out. This gives them a solution to those issues.
Now, I want to point out that we utilize, additionally, a lot of information provided to us by professional stakeholders. For instance, one of the big issues that our professional stakeholders talked to us about was the fact that they had difficulty staying in contact with many of their clients, tracking their needs, successes, and locations. After all, only 35% of the individuals that are homeless in Houston even have a cell phone to stay in contact with their caseworkers. The IOS not only gives us the ability to significantly impact the lives homeless individuals in Houston, but Houston in its entirety.
We'd like to thank our contributors from Open Door Mission, Daniel Garza, Edith, Sammy, and Butch, as well as Gary Greer from the Coalition, all of our professors here today, especially Professor Bruner and Dr. LaSalle and all their help getting us to this point. Michelle Alexander from Star of Hope, one of our past former members, Ashley Orsak, and of course all of our project cohorts, a lot of them are here today, John, Antonio, Frank, Melissa, Letty, and Heidi, and of course all of you. Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. Please be brief with your comments, and we'll take a couple of questions.
You knew where to go,
Wait.
huh? Here, let's come in.
Test. Once again, an excellent presentation. The IAS, is it a pilot program targeted at certain areas, or has it been rolled out? Could you expound on that?
We're actually in discussion with a couple nonprofits right now about getting it off of the ground. So it hasn't been launched yet, but all the software and all of those things everything's there that needs to be, but we haven't actually started to construct an actual kiosk itself. That's well beyond our resources.
Well, my question is, you guys have this huge resource in Houston. I don't know how you guys sectioned off your data. Is Southeast has a higher population than the Northwest community in Houston?
Well, when we did our research,